The Russia-Ukraine conflict, which began all the way back on the 20th of February 2014, has come to its peak tension on the 24th of February 2022 when Russia explicitly invaded Ukraine with a powerful military force, has been going on until this day with both sides taking heavy casualties, both in military and civilian personnel. All of the world knows that the civilians living in Ukraine have been suffering greatly as a result of this conflict. But what of the Russian people still trying to make a living in Russia, having nothing to do with the war that has been started by their president, Vladimir Putin? Today, we'll be diving deep into the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and we'll be exploring how the Russian people's life standards declined by the sanctions that have been imposed upon Russia by Western countries. If you're looking for more information about what's going on in the world and economics, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell to be notified of further videos. Russia has unleashed a catastrophic war on Ukraine, a 44 million-strong European democracy, shelling towns and closing in on the capital Kyiv, causing a major outflow of refugees. But why would Russia's authoritarian president rip up a peace agreement with his neighbor and launch Putins War, as European leaders have branded it? He has broken Europe's calm and jeopardized the continent's whole security framework. President Vladimir Putin warned on February 24th in a pre-dawn TV speech that Russia could not feel secure, develop, or exist because of what he believed was a persistent danger from contemporary Ukraine. Airports and military offices were targeted immediately, followed by the arrival of tanks and troops from Russia, Crimea, and Russia's ally Belarus. Cities have been bombarded, communities have been leveled, and millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. Despite this, Russia prohibits the use of the phrases war and invasion, threatening reporters with imprisonment if they do. This is a special military operation for President Putin. Many of his arguments for war were erroneous or unreasonable. He said that his purpose was to safeguard those who had been bullied or subjected to genocide, as well as to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. The term denazify has also caused an uproar all over the world. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, who was also a Jewish person, linked the words and actions of President Putin to Stalin's actions during World War II, explicitly calling him a dictator. Vladimir Putin has made it obvious that he wants to take control of Ukraine and topple the country's democratically elected government. The adversary has classified me as target number 1. My family is target number 2, President Zelensky added. The proclaimed objective of Russia is for Ukraine to be liberated from persecution and cleansed of Nazis. President Putin has spoken of bringing to justice those who perpetrated multiple horrific crimes against people. Under this false narrative of a fascist-run Ukraine since 2014, he has denied attempting to conquer Ukraine and has refuted the UK charges that he was planning to install a pro-Kremlin puppet before the war. But he has also stated that there would be no invasion. According to one unsubstantiated intelligence assessment, he even wants to divide the country in half. How did, then, the people of Russia react to this unnecessary bloodshed? Well, it's safe to say, except a few individualistic groups who were on Putin's team, are earnestly against this war. Many Russians' reactions to this war are crystal clear. Niet vaynya, which means no to war. Protests are still taking place across Russia, as young people, as well as middle-aged and even elderly individuals, go to the streets to express their opposition to a military action authorized by their president, a decision they allegedly had no say in. They're finally finding their voice. However, Russian officials are determined to silence any widespread outcry against the invasion of Ukraine. Demonstrations are suppressed nearly as fast as they begin, with police hauling some demonstrators away and roughing up others. According to an independent group that analyzes human rights abuses in Russia, police in St. Petersburg arrested at least 350 anti-war protesters on March 3rd, bringing the total number of protesters detained or arrested to 7,624 since the invasion began. Opposition to Russian President Vladimir Putin's military campaign in Ukraine is emerging from unexpected areas, despite the fact that it is still limited. According to the Financial Times, one of Russia's wealthiest individuals, billionaire businessman Mikhail Friedman, who was born in Ukraine, termed the bloodshed a tragedy, adding that war can never be the answer. But he avoided publicly condemning Putin. Meanwhile, members of Russia's intellectual elite, academics, writers, journalists, and others have issued public statements condemning the war, including a rare open letter to Putin signed by 1,200 students, faculty, and staff of MGIMO University. the prestigious Moscow State Institute of the International Relations, affiliated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which produces the majority of the country's government and foreign service elite. We are unequivocally opposed to the Russian Federation's military activities in Ukraine, the signers declare. Sitting on the sidelines and being mute while people die in a neighboring state is ethically wrong to us. They are dying as a result of individuals who chose armaments over peaceful dialogue, according to the letter. Many of us have friends and family living in the regions where military action is being carried out, the letter's signers note. However, war has not just affected them, it has also affected every one of us, and our children and grandchildren will be affected. Many generations of future diplomats will be required to restore lost faith in Russia and good ties with our neighbors. Publicly, Russia's diplomats have been in lockstep with the Kremlin, though the head of a Russian delegation to a United Nations climate change meeting, Oleg Anisimov, reportedly apologized for the military operation on behalf of all Russians who were not able to prevent this conflict, according to the Washington Post, adding that those who know what is happening to fail to find any justification for the attack. However, many Russians are unaware of what is going on in Ukraine. State-controlled television concentrates on so-called Ukrainian nationalists and neo-fascists rather than Russian bombing and shelling in Kiev and other Ukrainian cities. Many Russians are still coming to terms with the notion that war is truly happening. Even weeks after the Russian military swept into Ukraine, for weeks the US and other Western authorities had warned of an impending invasion. But Russian state media, particularly television news shows, derided those assertions, stating that Moscow had no intention of attacking Kiev militarily. Only 13% of Russians felt a Russian assault was possible in a CNN survey conducted before the invasion, and 2 out of 3 expected a peaceful resolution to the tensions between Russia and Ukraine. The war, Putins War, as Western countries are addressing it, weighs highly on the conscience of the Russian people. And with the sanctions that Western countries have applied, and still apply to this day, to Russia, Russian people are suffering from a war that they don't even want their country to participate in. The sanctions placed on Russia by the US and its European allies, which now include an American restriction on Russian energy imports, are the harshest ever imposed on a major economic power. Against the backdrop of a country with one of the world's top dozen economies, the speed with which they were implemented was extraordinary. The sanctions, which target Russia's banking system, influential people's wealth, and Russian fossil resources, are intended to punish Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs who support and rely on him, as well as to stifle the Russian economy. They make conducting conventional business in Russia impossible. In the immediate term, this signifies a significant slowdown in the economy. Since the invasion, the Russian stock market has been closed, and many Russian enterprises with shares listed overseas have had their equity values nearly wiped out. The Russian currency has plummeted since the war broke out and sanctions were imposed, and it is currently close to an all-time low. As the world's economy has become increasingly interwoven, the US dollar system's authority to govern worldwide commerce has gotten stronger. As a result of globalization, an ever-increasing amount of economic activity passes via a small number of choke points controlled by the US and its close European allies. Over time, the United States has also built up a piece of strong regulatory machinery headed by the executive branch to successfully regulate those choke points. As a result, whatever sanctions policy the US enacts may be implemented fast and effectively. Right now, Russia is feeling the full force of the US and its allies shutting down those choke points. But sanctions power is so uniquely American that the US can even go against its ostensible allies' wishes, as the Trump administration did with Iran after it exited the nuclear deal, without leaving the rest of the world with much recourse. Controls have also been placed in place to prevent corporations from transferring a wide range of commodities to Russia, including aviation, defense, and shipping components, as well as higher tech items such as semiconductors and communications equipment. Those U.S. export controls are meant to stymie Russia's ability to obtain the manufactured goods it needs to fight a long war. But they also aim to stymie high-value manufacturing and other domestic economic activity that isn't directly related to the war effort, such as commercial aviation, which will have no trouble finding replacement parts for its planes. In addition, there is a near-total ban on the U.S. corporations sending anything to the Russian military. The United States has also taken a move that, even a week ago, appeared well beyond what it was willing to do. The Biden administration imposed a prohibition on Russian oil, natural gas, and coal imports into the United States, while mainland Europe has refused to join the U.S. in this sanction simply because it is far more reliant on Russian energy imports and has no viable alternative. The United Kingdom announced shortly after the US announced its import ban that it would seek to end Russian energy imports by the end of the year. In what sanctions observers refer to as overcompliance, a slew of prominent multinational firms have voluntarily terminated commercial links with Russia in recent days. There is no legal requirement for them to terminate ties with their Russian counterparts, but CEOs have determined that the reputational risk and operational complexity are not worth it. MasterCard and Visa, for example, have stopped operating in Russia. ExxonMobil said it is pulling out of a major oil and gas project in Russia and will make no new investments in the country. BP is selling its nearly 20% stake in Rosneft for an estimated loss of $25 billion. And Shell is cutting its ties with Gazprom, despite recently purchasing Russian oil on the open market. It is not unprecedented for a long and growing list of global corporations to refuse to do business with a sanctioned country. Western corporations, for example, have severed ties with Iran, but like the sanctions themselves, the fact that it has happened in days rather than decades and that it is happening to the world's 11th largest economy is unprecedented. The events that led to the company's departure shed light on one of the ways U.S. sanctions may be so harsh. Even if the activity it is conducting is absolutely permitted under the provisions of the sanctions, no significant Western corporation can bear being seen doing business with a sanctioned entity. In corporate words, the reputational risk is excessive. Unfortunately for Russia, the sanctions imposed by the US and the West are extraordinarily broad, making it virtually hard to maneuver around them in order to prevent a prolonged economic collapse. In other words, Russia and Russian people's alternatives look to be severely restricted. An endeavor to strengthen commercial and financial relations with China is anticipated. And given that the two nations had previously had lesser levels of business contacts before Iran was struck with US sanctions, such a change might present a major development potential. Even a significant increase in commerce between Russia and China, however, will not be enough to counteract American and European sanctions. If you enjoyed the video and learned something from it, please consider liking and subscribing. It would mean a lot to keep these informative videos coming your way. And if you want to be notified when a new video drops, be sure to ring that bell.